Hello, everybody. TJ Schwartz here. I'm here with Lucas Burnley, and you're listening to the Edge and Flow podcast. We have a somewhat of a random episode, a randisode, I guess. We got a
It's
lot of
basically
stuff
our
going
life.
on. Yeah. And so we just touching base, talking about a lot of the things that are going on in business and stuff. And I told Burnley right before the podcast, I'm like, man, I got questions for you. I think you might have questions for me. So let's just get after it.
Freeform. All right, man. Well, okay. So it feels like you got stuff to talk about. Where do you want to start?
Well, you may be able to hear my CNC machine run in the background. I was kind of hoping it wouldn't come through into the office, but it might. And that what it's machining is the Confidant fixture for doing perimeter machining, chamfers, all that stuff. So the Confidant's the new fixed blade I'm launching, and I launched the pre-order as previously mentioned and whatnot. And so this is that batch. And I had a little bit of a hiccup with getting them surface ground. Long story short, a supplier screwed one of my other the supplier that was going to surface grind them got screwed by his supplier, and it's kind of a long story, but end up delaying me a little bit. So it's like kind of a trickle down effect, I guess you could say, in a supply chain, which a lot of people are seeing in the world these days, I guess. But
well, this is what we talk about, right? Like as soon as you let a product out of your shop
right.
or out of your process, you increase the risk of failure exponentially.
You add other people's world, their problems, their potential issues, their interests. You add that into the equation, which is just more variables, which I understand and I accept. I mean, that's an acceptable thing for me. And so,
well, yeah, because you're gambling, you're getting more capacity.
Yeah.
So the trade-off is that you get more capacity, but your risk goes up, and it might be slight, but you're just adding more potential for problems during shipping, for processing, for it's like all a learning curve.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny. I kind of was thinking about it. I was like, I almost feel like a shepherd. It's like I'm trying to move like a flock of sheep, like through the wild lands and like keep them away from predators. It's like monitoring them. You know what I mean? And like, it feels a little bit like that. Like I'm moving this flock of knives through.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate too. Well, and that's another issue of scale, right? Like more numbers. So as you do larger numbers, the active management component of that scales right along with everything else.
Yep.
Until you are a shepherd.
Yeah. And so right now, the way I look at it is like if I'm scaling, I'm either shepherding a little bit of a supply chain for a portion of what I'm doing, or I'm shepherding employees. So those are the two options. And so for now, it's outsourcing as far as like my supply chain as opposed to the employees. And I think employees are coming someday, but not right now. So that's, but I'm really happy. I did get them surface ground and back in the shop. I didn't want to make the fixture until I had them in my shop, just because I like being able to lay them out on the fixture and check fitment through each stage of making the fixture to make sure something isn't wacky or whatever.
Yeah. Even with your level of like CAD, it's still, I think it's so nice to have the physical,
and they're water jet
components.
So it's water jets are really accurate, but they have a curve, which means the edges aren't parallel. Like there's a little bit of a trapezoid kind of cross section to them. And so it's, there's just little things that can jump out and get you on a semi-precise operation like that.
Same. And the detail stack. So this is like one of those best practice things I feel like for you, where you're like, okay, I don't design a fixture until I have the actual water jet component back from water jet.
Yeah, exactly.
Going to save you probably a lot of headache in the future.
Yeah. And I might've mentioned that flow chart that did I mention it on the podcast? I posted it on Instagram.
I'm not sure, actually.
I made a flow chart not for production, but for actual new product development. And I staged all the things that need to happen for like a new fixed blade to get launched. And this is one of the things that I set it up in that order, was that I wouldn't make the fixture until they were done surface grinding. And so it's kind of like a chronological flow chart. And so I've been kind of stuck on like stage 2 or 3 out of this series of stages in the flow chart waiting. And so it just keeps me honest, because it's easy to get to, if you don't have like a guideline, like a roadmap, it's easy. Like I could have made the fixture, and I kept telling myself like, no, I made a flow chart for a reason. Like, don't make it. Don't, get backwards on this. So
I feel like that just is like, for any plan I put into place, is like, okay, I made the plan. And then the hard part is actually sticking to the plan.
Yeah.
Like you did this so you wouldn't have a problem. Like,
Yeah,
don't jump this
I
step.
laminated it and I put it on my whiteboard in the shop, and I've been like checking off each box like with a marker, and I'm like, just keep it honest, do it the way it's.
Stay in your lane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Satisfying
yeah,
anyway. All right.
yeah.
So we got confidants are rolling.
Hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, a good, really good knife designer came by your shop. You want to talk about it?
Oh man. Dude, it is so nice. So Jens Anso came and visited. Jens and I have been friends for almost the entire time I've been making knives, probably. And he's both one of the makers that I've looked up to most in the industry, and also feel the most. I don't know if camaraderie is it, but we have, I think, like a very similar process in terms of like design, even from a visual standpoint, and just aesthetics and the way we look at the industry. I've always said we kind of like leapfrog each other with ideas. A lot of times it's like I noticed that we're working on similar concepts around the same time. And over the years, I think we've done either like 4 or 5 in-person collaborations where like I would fly over to Denmark or he'd fly to New Mexico, and work in each other's shops. And yeah, with kids and growing businesses and time and just life, we haven't done that in a long
Mhm,
time. So we haven't seen each other or spent time together like outside of a show in probably like 7 or 8 years.
mhm,
So yeah, he flew out for like a long weekend and we just hung out, and I showed him around Bend, and man, it's awesome. It's so nice just to sit and have the conversations. Like as a maker, when you are able to like the same type of conversations that you and I have where you click with someone and are just able to like enjoy the process of like debate and exploration,
yeah.
it's rad.
Yeah, I've told people before that this industry is, like, really full of people and really amazing people, but in a weird way, there's a lonely factor to it because it's like
Totally.
the odds of someone in this industry being, like, next door to you is kinda low. I've got a few
Yep.
because I'm in Boise, but when you go to a show, like, you just realize, like, all these like-minded people just kinda feed your flame. But like you
Yep.
said, at a show, I mean, it's a different environment. There's customers, there's
Yep.
tons of people you gotta talk to. You can't have, like, that really authentic experience.
Yeah. You might get a dinner, but there might be, a small dinner is 8 people,
Yeah, yeah,
so your time is divided no
yeah.
matter what.
Well, Jens is absolutely, like, superlative in the industry. I really look
Yeah.
up to Jens, and I've only met him 2 or 3 times, and I just, one of those show situations, like,
Yep.
couple passing conversations. I'd love to
Yeah.
get to know him a little better, but
Yeah.
he's one of the good guys.
Yeah. He's definitely one of the good guys. It's cool, man. Just like hearing what he's up to. So, I mean, he has, his company and the product that they're producing. He is one of the founding members of Giant Mouse. And then, he does production collaboration too. So like for me, there's not a whole lot of people that are doing the business, like very similar to what I'm doing as far as like the moving pieces.
Mhm,
And like Jens is probably the closest.
mhm.
So it's really fun just to be able to like run the gamut of thoughts that go through like everything from like, oh, I just made this one knife by myself to like now my company is doing this,
Mhm.
or like I'm working with these companies. And it's just, man, it's so satisfying. We basically just like we were gonna do some stuff in the shop. I'm like, day one, we just like went for a hike, and it's like 3 hours later, it's like, oh well, it's time to go have a beer, and then
Yeah.
like go visit. Oh, that's something that's pretty fun. So we went and visited Keaton, Myrick, my watchmaking buddy, and got to like hang out in his shop. You were asking about the Rose engine a
Yeah.
little bit. Witchcraft.
That thing. Yeah, it's almost like got a steampunk element to it, or like
Fully.
you look at it
I
and
was joking about it. I said that that's like where the genre of steampunk would have
yeah,
originated.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
for sure. And it's like there I'm like, where's the computer? Like
yeah,
where's the CNC? And then I look, I'm like, wait, you're turning a knob? Like it's like you're operating like a lathe or something. It's crazy.
dude. Yeah. It's got these discs that like everything engages different. And then there's like different phasing and all of it at the end. So you're dealing with all this precision at the end. Your thumb is still pressing the engraver.
Mhm.
So there's like this crazy level of detail and like kind of settings that you have to manage.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also still have to have like skilled touch.
Yeah. What a cool thing.
It's wild. The technique that it's used for is guilloche for you guys, if you're unfamiliar. So if you just, it's spelled exactly like it sounds. So guilloche,
Mm-hmm.
go look it up. And it's what you think of as like the wavy pattern, maybe on like watch cases or like Fabergé or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's so cool.
It's like machine knurling or what is it? Jeweling.
It's like,
but
it's
with
engraving. So it uses an engraving cutter in a repeating pattern. There's too much. So like Keaton is in there like creating patterns that are repeatable and then using those on a watch face, but like watching him develop the patterns and then create the repeatability is what is mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
I think, in the knife world, I was trying to think, like you see it occasionally. Alan Elishewitz is the maker that I really think about it. I think he had like maybe like a straight line and a rose engine, something like that. It's cool stuff though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, did that.
Do you know the history behind those machines? Like where are those from?
I don't know the history. Keaton would be a good one to ask about that. Pretty sure they're from the watchmaking industry. They also use them for like ornamental turning, but it's like a different setup. So I would be curious to know if the origin was metal or wood.
Yeah,
first.
good question.
That I don't know.
And if Da Vinci had drawn it on a page and it's in a museum somewhere,
Yeah.
It seems like everything cool that exists in the world, Da Vinci figured it out before everybody else. So.
Something.
Yeah.
He was sipping of the elixir.
Yeah. He knows something. He knew something we don't. That's for sure.
Yeah. He had universal access.
Yeah.
He had the high download speed.
Yep. That's right.
Man. So that was really, really good. Just to go off on like a side tangent of this too, this has happened to me a few times over the last couple of years, which is like, as we get older and life gets busy, like it's really easy to drift apart from friends. And you spend so much time building these relationships at different points in your life that like, man, like just checking in with someone once a month, there's a huge amount of value in it. Mm-hmm. And if it's not value for you, it might be value for the other person. Mm-hmm. And maintenance is so easy if the relationship has already been built. Yeah. And I've had like a few friends reach out and just be like, hey, I realized we hadn't talked in 2 years and I miss you. And I just want to like say hi. Yeah. And I'm like, that's a good way to start the new year.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to do that too a little bit.
No, I'll definitely take that to heart. Yeah. I've always, I said earlier just now, like there's like that little loneliness element in what we do because we're a single guy in a shop.
Yep.
And so yeah, that's just important. That just kind of highlights like what a cool era too that you can actually do that. I mean, you're collaborating with a guy in Denmark. I mean, what a world, right?
And we met, because of internet forums.
Yeah. And so
it is really pretty
we
rad.
should definitely as humans be utilizing that for good purposes, which like you said, staying in contact, maintaining, quality lifelong relationships and stuff for sure.
I think it lends to a general well-being mm-hmm. in life. Like you think about it, I'm trying to reach out more regularly, like just grab lunch or mm-hmm. a beer mm-hmm. with buddies here. Yeah. And in Bend, all the friends are newer. So you're still kind of in that stage of like developing the friendship. It's not, I've known you for a decade and you instantly pick up where you left off. Mm-hmm. It's like, or there's a few dads that I've made friends with, like because of the kids at school. And then the kid will leave school and you're like, well, actually I'd like to stay in touch, but you gotta put in the work.
Yeah. Takes a little bit more than just thinking about it. Yeah.
That's good. So yeah, lots of my cup is full right now as far as just like feeling like I got to really have some good conversations and some feedback. One thing that was super helpful, and this is great. So we're doing the QC on the last of the SQDs. And to be fair, I am very critical, right? I am critical of my own work and like I don't always know in relation to production, even after this many years, if I'm being reasonable or not. Mm-hmm. And so it was great to have Jens and be able to ask him, like, cause he's used to dealing with giant mouse stuff,
Yeah.
and just be able to say like, hey, like what are you seeing? What are you comfortable with? Am I like, is what I'm calling out as a problem? Do you see it as a problem?
Mm-hmm.
So that was like a pretty good little bit of
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah. No, I'm sure he's got amazing insight. Yeah. Giant Mouse
Yep.
is impressive. They got a lot of Italian stuff they've been doing. And
Yep. Yeah, they're crushing.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
good.
The Italians make some sweet knives, man.
Yep.
And sweet cars.
It's it's like, I feel like it's like slightly less known at this point,
Yeah.
but yeah, when you look at what some of them are doing, like you're like, Lion Steel, Viper, Fox, like they're just doing really high end work, and it's different. But most of the companies were old school companies to start. So like you look back and you're like, oh, here's these like wood handled
Mm-hmm.
lockbacks from like the 1970s. It's cool to see like where like generationally, or like a son will come into the company, or like new blood will come into the company and start to like modernize it.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
It's pretty
It kind of reminds me of, it's a little bit different plane, but it kind of reminds me of Boker. Similar kind of thing going on
totally.
there. Got that like German history, but then they modernized in some categories.
Yep.
Which brings up a good point. Like in Germany, is there any other knife companies other than Boker?
Oh man, are you kidding? That's gonna that like, maybe that's like a buddy trip we do sometime.
Yeah.
So in Germany, Solingen is Germany's like cutlery hub. So if you think about it from the standpoint of like kitchen knives only, you have like Wusthof and Henkel's, you have Boker, and then there's a bunch of smaller brands. Boker is not a kitchen specific line, whereas like Wusthof and Henkel's are.
That's why I haven't heard about them.
Yeah. And then there's inside of Solingen, there's all of these smaller brands, right? And some of them not even that much smaller, but like Puma and trying to think. I'm gonna glitch and like not remember it. But that is the town industry.
That's awesome.
Super cool. Yeah. Same with Italy. So you have Maniago, right? Which is Cutlery City. Japan, you have Seiki City.
Yep.
Which is like traditional. I think there's more than that now that I don't really know about. Spain was Toledo. And I would argue that US is kind of like, I guess overall it's probably Portland.
Yeah, probably. I was going to say Portland and Boise.
Portland and Boise, but firmly situated in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
That would be the takeaway.
Yeah, Idaho, Oregon, mainly Idaho and Oregon, honestly, in large part.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've got a lot of cool brands elsewhere, but like as a density.
But the hub, the big companies, it's like you look at Portland and you've got Leatherman, Benchmade, Kershaw, CRKT. There's an industry there.
Yeah. No, that's where like the big boys are. That's kind of like the Nashville of knives is like Portland.
And then what's cool is now you have like the more modern companies, like you see James Brand or, Burnside Knives, or like just like companies that pop up in the ecosystem. Arguably the same way kind of around Boise, which would be, was Chris Reeve the first like big company there?
Well, if you're talking Boise specifically, he kind of brought high-end knives into
Boise, right?
Yeah, but you've got Buck Knives in Idaho. You got Piranha.
And where were they?
Buck is northern Idaho, Post Falls, way north. Yeah. And then you've got like Piranha, who do cool automatic knives and stuff. They're southern Idaho. And then you've got Tops Knives, Fixed Blades. And then
has Tops always been in Idaho?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I actually feel like maybe they have been, but but you see like that scale, like at a point, it just becomes easier to conduct business when there are businesses of a like kind. That's why, when you look at manufacturing on the East Coast, like that's why you can still go there and get tons of machine tools, is because it was a hub.
Yeah. Well, and also like when there's a certain, like when talent and understanding surrounds an industry, then it starts to like trickle out and you get like a family tree. Because you can look at, the Benchmade story and the Kershaw story and the CRKT story. There's like Gerber's there, and Gerber was like one of the OGs. And then there was like a little.
I don't even know how I forgot Gerber.
Yeah, there's like a little bit of a family tree that comes from Gerber out there. And so same thing with Chris Reeve, I think, in Boise specifically. But I was thinking about, there's probably 6 or 8 like manufacturers within like a 50-mile radius of Boise, something like that.
Yeah.
At this point.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. But
what else? So that's okay. There's my weekend and kind of a weird digression, but history and locations of manufacturing.
Yeah. So we do have a very big elephant in the room to address. The
Okay.
project that we've been working on together that we
Yep.
talked about in the last episode, the anonymous or the not anonymous, the
Yeah.
the transparent project, quite the
The
opposite,
transparent project. Yep.
is unnamed. And so we
Right.
talked about naming this sucker so that you guys can know what you're looking at. So
Yep.
you're the designer. You came up with a
Yep.
name. Let's hear it.
You approved it as the
Yeah.
manufacturer. We are calling it the Nova 1.
Yep. Nova dash one, like the numerical
Nova
one.
dash 1. Yep.
Yeah.
So origin of Nova being new.
Mm-hmm.
And also like my continuing obsession with somehow designing stuff for space marines. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a
Kind of
perfect
a
name. I really like it because I'm a classic car guru. Like it is a
Yep.
classic car name too. So
Yep.
there's a little bit of that, and it does kind of fit the vibe.
Yep.
But yeah, Nova One. I like concise names.
Yeah. Same.
Confidant. It's a big word if you look at it, but it's
Yep.
like I don't know. It seems more concise than it looks on paper. And like I just like simple, clean names. And Nova One is
Yep.
just right. I
I think
think.
it fits. That's naming like I don't know. I always think there's a lot of power in a name,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it does a name make a knife? No, but like makes it cooler
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes.
Well, it has the power to sync projects. I mean, you
Sure.
misname something, like you can not maybe sync it, but you can damage a rollout for sure. But
Yep.
yeah, I hope you guys like that. So definitely comment, and from now on, we will be referring to it as the Nova One, and it is
Henceforth.
still the transparent project. So you guys will be hearing all about
Yep.
it. I guess that brings us to a point. If you want to give us an update on design,
Yeah. So the plan with this is basically for me to dial in like visuals as we go. But since you're essentially engineer and manufacturer on this, there's a point where it doesn't make sense for me to take the work too far.
right?
Okay. Both from a time standpoint, but also from a manufacturing standpoint. So I have completed basically initial sketches and a V1 CAD model. So I sent you the CAD model,
Mm-hmm.
and basically at this point, you and I are going to go back and forth on the overall profile and any changes that have to happen to like the general form before we start getting into any other details.
Yeah, kind of big picture vision conversation and
Big picture, yeah,
ergonomics.
we're going to look at it, put it in your hand. Is it the right size? Are the lines and general proportions where we want them?
Mm-hmm.
And then probably what we'll do is that'll get kicked back over to me. I'll make a round of changes and then add some. There's a few details that I'll add here. Like I'll do like probably the pocketing. One change that I already made is that on the knives that you've currently done, you've done 3 handle screws,
Mm-hmm.
right? I a lot of times do 2. This is where I think the value of I'm designing in your ecosystem. So the goal is I'm going to add that 3rd screw so that you can do like your bird's eye assembly on it.
You can, but I'm
Okay.
thinking about it. I don't think it's critical. I don't think it matters.
Okay.
I think I just do
Okay.
3 as like a default. But I'm
Totally.
thinking. I mean, I just designed a fixture this morning. I don't think it's required.
Totally. Not
Yeah,
required. But this is some of the like just the design language stuff that I think is fun to carry through. If it doesn't if you have a design language that you're using inside of your company and it doesn't detract from a product that I am submitting, I don't see an issue with including it.
right.
6 of one, half dozen of
Yeah,
another.
yeah,
We can try it both ways
yeah.
and we can make a judgment call. We can move away from like, what do you call that? Your handle screw assembly. Do you have a name for it?
That's a good question. I don't have a name. It is. I've never seen it quite done like that. It is
I haven't
it's a
either.
weird way of doing it, but shoot, I should probably come up with a cool trademark, slick name for it.
Some kind of eye.
Yeah, right. No, it's
What kind of eye?
yeah. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's basically the only thing that holds the whole thing together is the collars. So if it
Right.
didn't have the collars, it wouldn't actually work. And it was kind of a process-oriented design situation, and that is
Right.
that I wanted a collar that was cool, but, like, I actually needed it from a mechanical standpoint because I don't like going too small on screws. I just
Right.
632 or bigger, and so with a 632 screw, the barrels that are threaded that I could source that were able to have a 632 thread that I wasn't gonna have to have custom made, the diameter of that barrel was larger than the largest screw head of a 632, and that's getting a little into the weeds, but the screw heads would pull through, like there would just be no like purchase on the handle material. And so the washer is actually what holds the handle down, not the screw. And so the added benefit is that you can custom order it with brass, stainless, black, or whatever on the collar, so you can get a little contrast, a little glint of another color.
And the alternative would have been you would have had to have had custom standoffs machined, or you would have
Yeah,
modified them.
yeah,
And so you got like kind of a double win there, which is you got a unique look and designed to the process instead
yeah,
of processing to the design,
yeah, yeah.
which is pretty
And
cool.
that's brings up another philosophy that I learned early on, and that is more parts doesn't mean harder to make. Like
Right.
there, more parts can mean easier. Oftentimes, less parts is actually harder. So that's one thing. It depends on the project, but like I designed a knife one time that had no screws and as minimal number of parts as possible, and it was a lot harder than a normal knife. And
Yeah.
that you would think like, oh, the manufacturing is going to be cheaper because it has less parts, not so much. So
Yep. Well, and I think too, there like for designers, there's this thought that like, a design is done when you can't take anything else away.
mhm.
And that is a very cool sounding
Yeah, yeah,
concept. That's like like going into like your AirPods or something. You're like, there's nothing here that doesn't need to be here. But it also doesn't always match an aesthetic that you're going
yeah,
for. So sometimes more parts is also not less design,
yeah,
if that makes
yeah, and
sense.
especially like if the parts are the right parts, because
Yeah.
if it's a like from in this perfect example, instead of having custom barrels, the washers that I buy are standard washers. They're not. I'm not
Yeah.
custom ordering those, so I'm not having to make custom parts. It's like you're looking at the internet catalog that's like a billion parts out there, and you're kind of trying to think of how you can combine them in unique ways.
Yep.
And it's like all that is ordering stuff is easier than making custom stuff. So
And so all of that is the reason that I'm including those screws in this design,
oh, okay.
because that whole process I think is actually very cool to what you're doing. So it's something that like just feels very honest
Hmm.
to
To do
put in. It's not just an aesthetic. You had a reason for doing it. And
three
it's like,
screws, you mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
well, 3 screws, but specifically the screws with the
Yeah,
collars,
yeah, yeah.
right? Like just that general
Right,
process.
right. It's a little I hope it's gonna be a little bit of a signature of my stuff. I know it's not the first time people have put collars on a fixed blade, but, yeah, it
Yeah,
works.
the way that you're doing it is a little bit different though. We always worry about like, yeah, doing it. You especially with your desire to reach the furthest, you know, corner of whatever,
Yeah,
plane
get to
you're
the
on.
edge.
Yeah, getting to the edge. I tried not to say it. But sometimes it I feel like it's just reimagining something that is aesthetically pleasing in your own image.
Right.
Like you want to like I really really like that. I don't want to do what this person did, but I want to create that feeling
Mhm.
around it.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
No, for sure, and yeah, it's interesting how, like, product design works, and so I hope you guys are excited for, Burnley to push me a little bit and for us to take this to the next level with this bigger knife that's gonna, test some of my manufacturing stuff, and these little problems are things we're gonna have to navigate, so
Now that you've like sat on the design a little bit, is there anything on it as of right now that you see being a problem in manufacturing?
not in manufacturing, no.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
no.
Or in finishing?
The finishing is the tumble is
Yeah.
still the question. I think we're gonna be good. Good ask there because I actually talked to I could call him a buddy of mine. His name's Jesse Jaros.
Yep.
Jaros, you know him?
Yep. Gross,
in
yeah.
Montana, and he's a knife maker. He's got the same tumbler that I do, and I wanted to talk to him because I'd only met him briefly, and I wanted to ask him about his tumbler and kind of how he was doing it, and see just some pointers or whatever. And I called him first time talking to him on the phone. Just super nice guy, super open book, and he gave me some pointers on this tumbler that I think might answer a few questions. Because what I saw is he was doing some massive knives, like he even does like machetes. And
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
was trying to figure out like, okay, what problems is he having? And he answered a couple questions for me. So I think
Nice.
I think, I think the cages I'm using are working, but I think there's another way forward as another
Oh,
possible way,
okay.
but not without consequence either. Cause I guess I'll dive into that.
Sure. I was gonna say, like,
Yeah,
don't hold out if it's
yeah.
something you want to talk about.
No, it's not like secret. I mean, there's probably 15 makers listening to this that are going to say, "Yeah, I already knew that," which even in some ways I kind of already knew it, but he told me, this is how he's doing it. But basically, with tumbling, the longer you tumble it, the general idea with the finishing process is it's going to average out better and better and be like more consistent the longer it's in
Right.
the tumbler. If you leave it in there for I've been doing like 1 to 2 3 hours like playing in that range.
Yep. Yeah, until the point you actually start to change dimensions.
Yeah, and so his point was like that you gotta tumble it longer than that. He's going way longer than that, and if it's changing dimensions, what you have to do is dial back the grit of the media, and so there's a happy point where it's like this is like it's almost like data because the amount of like abrasion happening to the part, it's
Yeah.
random. But the thing about randomness is if you have a big enough random data set, then it becomes really even and well distributed.
Right.
And so that's why tumbling in a long time works. But if you have coarse media, you're eating the tip and your chamfers are disappearing. And so
Yep.
he's gone to a finer grit and a longer tumble. And so I've got a relatively coarse grit, and that might be a part of my problem. But that's something I'm going to experiment with.
I'm gonna push back on it, but not like real hard.
Okay.
The only thing that I can say about that too is like as a surface finish, you can be looking for a different thing out of tumbling. So
Yeah.
if you tumble for a long time, there are finish techniques that you can't do
Mhm.
also.
Yeah.
But it really depends on what the end goal is.
Yeah.
If it's true deburring and like uniform finishing, more time at the right grit definitely makes more sense.
Mhm.
I like to do things where it's like a lot of times I'm doing it as like a final finish where I almost want like a crystalline
Yeah.
structure.
Like marbled
You,
almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
you like tumble too long, that goes away, or
Yeah.
I'm using it for like distressing over
Yeah.
anodizing. And so I think as long as you have like the idea of
Yeah.
what you're actually trying to accomplish and not trying to put everything under one,
Yeah.
tumbling
And
practice.
and that's where I've been is I do like that marbled look that we've talked about
Yeah.
that, like where you're tumbling a shorter period of time. But there's two problems I've run into with that. One is if I want to put more knives in the tumbler, that
Yeah.
randomness becomes a problem
Yep.
because they intersect each other, which is why I came up with the cages, which somewhat
Yep.
works. I think it's a decent solution. But the other problem is if you're not tumbling it long enough to like I'm sandblasting the parts before putting them in the tumbler, just a real
Right.
light like fine grit. If you don't tumble it long enough, you actually leave pits from the sandblasting that are possibly corrosion points.
Totally.
And so you'll
Totally.
actually get a more likely to have corrosion and rust if you're not tumbling
Yep.
it long enough. But
Yep.
if you don't blast it, then you have to tumble it longer because there's the heat treat patina and like other marks that need to come
And
out.
you generally come out with a different color
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah,
So third option there, like you can pre-tumble for deburring,
yeah.
then go to blasting, then go to another round of tumbling.
Mhm.
I mean, it's like depending on what the desired outcome is, it might be like a moot point,
Yeah,
right? If you're just looking for like a really smooth uniform gray,
yeah,
you just tumble it until it gets to that point. Up until you get to bright finishes, because you can stagger tumbling techniques and theoretically go much closer towards like a
yeah,
mirror polish. Like if you look at a blade on a Swiss Army knife, they're tumbling to that finish.
yeah. And it looks
So
near
it's like
mirror.
pretty shiny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah, no, that I still have a lot to learn. I think vibratory finishing is it's a fun thing, but it is a time consuming and expensive thing because like the
yep.
tumbler is a costly thing. That's fine.
Yep.
But buying media is such a gamble because it's
Yeah.
insane. It's like maybe $500 worth of media just to fill that tumbler.
Well, and remember, most of the tumbler companies will do testing for you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a finish that you like and you have a product, you can send them, like you could send them a machined blade and a finish that you like and say, I want to get close to this.
Mm-hmm.
And they will develop a process for you.
Yeah.
So that's
Those
a
are
very, very
it's a
good
good thing to
use
consider.
of other people's process. And then really to mess with your head, you could go to like a centrifugal finisher,
Yep. Yep.
high speed,
Yeah.
not vibratory.
High energy is a great solution if I had the
Yep.
space, but that it's something that's like on the long list maybe. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. My buddy Pat Pruitt uses like the high energy
Yeah. That's how I
finishers
do it. That's how Chris
for
Reeve does it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And Chris
but
Reeve,
you can also like literally just melt your knife into nothing.
yeah, yeah.
Like it will eat it.
Yeah, it'll disappear. And yeah, we're talking
Yeah.
minutes, not hours.
So
Yeah.
it's like pretty cool.
Yeah. No, for
All
sure.
right. So next stage is on Nova One. You got to get on that, look at it, boot it back over to me. And then, yeah, we're just going to keep
Yeah.
kind of
Get
chipping
some
away
3D
at it.
prints rolling.
Get some 3D
Yeah.
prints.
We'll be posting pictures of
post some
3D prints on
videos.
that so you guys can see. I really look forward to holding it because with a fixed blade, I've said it before, it's like ergonomics are almost everything because it's just like it's a fixed blade. And so I'm really excited. I know you're kicking it around and getting the ergonomics right, and I can't wait to see how that turns
I
out.
feel like I'm close. My gut is that I could have done one more round of iteration, but I actually got stuck on the CAD getting a line the way I wanted it. And so I wanted your feedback on how to correct this in Fusion. I know how I would do it in
Are you talking about
Rhino.
you're having a hard time trying to decide artistically or actually just using the program?
Actually get to a point. It's like I'm using like, a 3-point arc to like match something, and I'm not getting it the way that I want it. And I remember you showing me some methods that had more control. So yeah, but I think it's close. The biggest changes that I've made from the initial draw, like my initial sketch, were the V1, I extended the blade length to like 5 inches. First real change was I extended the length of the handle and slightly changed the angle.
Cool.
And that now I feel like we're in a really good like starting spot.
Good.
This is ground zero.
That's great. Yeah, I can't wait to handle it.
So
yeah, and we talked about this is another little thing is like I have my coupons for my handles water jet, and so one of the process things I'm thinking about is like standardizing coupons to some degree, and that's thickness and overall dimension without waste too. Because if you have a big coupon and a small handle, you get waste. And so it looks like your knife is going to be in the range of a new coupon category. But what I might do is I've got another design that's larger in mind, and I might get the design on mine going a little bit so that I can see about making these
where we
coupons
can
fit for both,
match those
even
up.
if it's down the road. And that's the mindset I'm trying to pursue here is like there has to be some degree of standardization, but I don't want the standardization to totally control design.
Yeah, I respected when because I asked you right away. I was like, hey, we can scale this thing down to match your current coupon size, and you were quick to say like, no, I don't want my process to dictate the design. And that, I mean, from a manufacturing standpoint, that's actually a difficult decision to make because you just incurred more cost and more
just an inventory expansion.
Yeah,
situation.
just to do this. Yeah. But the designer in you is also looking at this from the fact that you don't want to alter the visuals just to hit a manufacturer.
It's process oriented design, not process driven design.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're looking at, I think the scale, like max width on that scale would be like 1 and 550 thousandths or something. What is your current coupon?
1.5 on the height.
Yeah, like just
my coupons are 1.5.
So we actually, with like very minor tweaking, we may be able to work.
But how long is it though?
The length of it is that might actually be an issue. What is your current 5? No, we're 4 and 3/4.
So I'm not gonna. Yeah, like I said, if
Yeah,
if it
yeah.
works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But
Yeah, yeah.
that's one thing. If we're within 50 thou, like maybe. But the other thing is the
Yeah. I would
thickness.
say 75. I think we would be your current thickness quarter
Quarter
inch.
inch is what I'm buying.
I feel like we're probably pretty close there.
Okay.
So we'll play it by ear.
Yeah.
We don't need to rush it.
Because if we're gonna,
this is why the profile is so important.
yeah,
Is because we have to know what is this handle actually going to be sized at,
yeah,
and how big is this knife? Because it's easy to say like, oh, we're just going to scale this down by 2%, and it would fit.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But
So yeah, that's a good point. And the other thing though is if we do decide to go thicker, then we're no longer at all tied to that dimension, the 1.5, because it's not going to matter anyway.
right,
But
and that's really where the 3D print comes in.
yeah, and the other thing is, this is really getting into it, but like a sheet is 24 by 36 that I buy for this
Yep.
my Carta G10. I chose 1.5 by 5 because it actually fits. It yields really well in a sheet.
Right.
So that's another little thing, but it's not critical,
Okay. Then we'll have sheathing. Oh man, there's so much.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like we're actually, all things being equal, we're making pretty good time on this for not really actually having done much.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm just getting things smooth, like that flow chart. I'm in a testing phase. The Confidant's the first one to use that new product development flow chart, and so I'm kind of learning. I want to compress product development cycles. I think in the knife industry are sometimes frustratingly long.
Yeah.
And because I have the ability to shorten it, I
Yep.
want to do that, right?
Yep.
So,
Well, we talked about it a little bit on the last one, I think, which is, so far during this project, one of the biggest benefits that I can see about a fairly rapid development time is that we are able to talk about the project in real time.
yeah, exactly.
I think that is super, super valuable. I just think it makes a project more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's in 6 months or a year, if you were giving the updates and showing the work over that course of time, I just think you have a more interested base.
Yeah. Yeah. And
right. It's the storytelling component.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that I really like seeing. Like, I follow brands in the car industry and in the knife industry and whatnot. And like, if you just see a perfect image on Instagram and nothing else, like that design and execution and price better be awesome for that thing to sell.
Yep.
But
yeah, because you're not emotionally invested in the process.
Exactly. And so that's part of the job sometimes as a designer, is to get it without having any previous association, to look at it and say, I want it. And there's that. But if you have a story behind something and you can understand the reason why it was done, how it was done, the heart that went into it, then you still want it to be that knife that like grabs your attention and makes you want it if you'd never heard of it. But it just creates a fuller package, you know what I mean? Like a bigger picture.
Just understanding.
Yeah.
And something that I'm actually really excited about, I kind of hope we have some failures on it, which is like hard to say because it's you and I don't want you to have any failures. But at the same time, I'm like, man, if there's a component of this that doesn't work first time, either in the design standpoint or in manufacturing, it's that same thing. It's like, okay, it's just part of the process.
Gives us something to learn from, something to talk about.
Yeah, gives you something to learn from. And it's like, that's social media in general, man. Everybody sees the final product. Everybody sees the best picture of whatever experience.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool to be able to show that like it actually, like a lot of this is actually work.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
and not perfect.
Yeah. With a podcast like this, I do like the thought of being pretty level with like failures. Yeah. And that's why I was talking about this, surface grinding thing. Like it was water jet. And then it's all done locally, so there's no shipping. But it was water jet, and it was 55 days to get it surface ground. And so it's like that's that's a huge chunk of time and a huge chunk of money, which is another point. I've got a friend who runs a bit and spur company that is huge. It's like really, really famous. He is Chris Reeve, but bits and spurs. Yeah. So he went from custom making it like more of your conventional like blacksmith type worker, and then he created like a company but didn't overly grow it to where it's still like high-end multi-$100, but it is still production.
Small scale manufacturing, like, high end.
His name's Tom Balding. He's in Sheridan, Wyoming, but the reason I brought him up is he told me one time he brought in a consultant to talk to him about his company just to see where he could improve. And they told him, they said, you have to realize every day that a new product launch is delayed is
Yep.
not a delay. It's loss. Because if a
Say
product,
that again. Say that one more time.
every day that a new product that you're trying to launch is delayed is not actually a delay. It is a loss. And what I mean
Okay.
by that is, so if you launch a product 6 months later than you hoped, it's
Yep.
easy to think like, well, I'm still making the same money. It just
Right.
was delayed by 6 months. That's
Yep.
not actually true. What's true is you lost 6 months of sales. Because
Yep.
even if that product was going to sell out, well, in
Yep.
6 months time you would have been on the next project. And so
Right.
everything's been offset by 6 months. That's not a delay, that's an actual loss.
Sure.
And so the point of that conversation, what him and I were talking about when he said that, was like, if you're trying to get something going, like let's say I ran out of tooling on like this fixture, he was saying if it's going to prevent a new product from getting to market by even a few days, overnight the shipping, because he was
Yep.
saying it's easy to like continue to kick the can a little bit and not
Yep.
realizing that, like, no, compress the product design and development cycle as much as possible, and at up to a point almost any cost,
Yep.
because you're losing money every day that it's not on the market.
Yep.
And so that's, I just circle back to like, that's a kind of a painful little lesson with the supply chain thing of like 50 days, it wasn't delayed. It was 50
Was
days of
this what you
loss.
were talking about in the beginning where you said like a couple of your suppliers had problems
Yeah. Yeah. With the surface
together?
grinding.
Okay.
Yeah.
So without going into details of like the who's and whatnots, but what was the actual problem? What was the issue?
Yeah. So let me preface this with just saying that I don't have any interest in hiding my suppliers from people listening to the podcast or my customers and stuff. Like, I'm an open book about who is supplying and helping me and doing all that. Of course, all in the United States, most of them in Boise. But in this case, like, there's a little bit of a tense situation happening between a few suppliers that trickled down to
Right.
me. And so I'm just leaving out their names for this conversation until I have the go ahead to talk more about this, which I think we should in a future
Yeah. Maybe that's
episode
just like
once
a
this
good
kind of,
like a post action report of like
yeah,
a problem that happened
yeah.
and what
But
we can learn from it.
exactly. But at a bird's eye view, basically, I was having my all my knives like Blanchard ground to thickness, which is another way to surface grind. And the this company that was doing the Blanchard grinding for me, they're a knife manufacturer. They had a whole bunch of knives that heat treat. The knives came back. They had some serious issue with basically just bad finish on the blades that was going to require more surface grinding. They had been surface ground prior to heat treat, and so the fact that they needed all this work after was a surprise to my
Right.
supplier. And so they basically had this huge stack up of work that was like kind of forced upon them on their Blanchard machine, that was it just kind of displaced my work.
Right.
And they were honest with me about it. Like, this is what's happened to us. And I was in the loop. They're a local company who I know like kind of the ins and outs of what they're doing.
Right.
So I saw this coming once I found out that they had this issue on their plate. And so I had to kind of just turn 90 degrees, find a new supplier in the valley to surface grind for me.
Right.
So that's where that 50 days, it was kind of like this huge like change of
Right.
supplier,
Right. Right.
not because I'm leaving the supplier, but because they got in a big bind that trickled down to me.
Well, and this
So,
brings up like a kind of it's like a teachable moment, which is like,
mhm.
what did you come away with any takeaways? Because ultimately the problem wasn't in your process and it wasn't even in your supplier's process. It was someone that they were working with creating downstream effects, um,
Mhm.
which affected you. So do
Yeah.
you think there's anything that you would do differently moving forward when you're batching work like this, or was it fully unavoidable?
Yeah. And so what I can do is basically, I agree 100%, like an after action report. When something happens, it's like, I would call this a catastrophic
Okay.
situation. And it's not for me necessarily. It was for this
Right.
vendor of mine that is currently kind of in a bit of a bind. And so I was doing exactly what you're saying, is, sitting around thinking like, what could have been, there's nothing they could have done directly to stop
Right.
it, but there's maybe like insurance type moves that could have been made. And one thing for me that I realized is, what parts of making a knife can you lose a whole batch
Yeah.
all at once? or like massive percentage of the
Yeah.
batch. There's only a few parts that can happen. One of them is shipping, but that's not what happened
Right.
here. What happened was a heat treat anomaly,
Right.
you could call it, and a lot of knives were
Right.
lost all at once. And basically, a heat treat oven at a big industrial operation can be large enough to put like 1,000
Yeah.
knives in at one
All your
time.
knives.
Yeah, and so it's like you could literally put the equivalent of a house worth of
Right.
knives in dollars into one oven at the same
Right.
time. And an analogy would be like if you're a bakery and you have the biggest oven known to
Yep.
man and you put like a week worth of bread in all at
Yep.
once, if it burns,
Yep.
you're in
Right.
trouble, right? And so the thing is, yeah, these industrial heat treat facilities, I'm not picking on them at all, but it is a liability to have all of your product in an environment where they can all be
Yep.
ruined, even if it's like a 1%
And a
chance.
cost, you're going to get a cost savings. And that's where a lot of us look and you
Yeah.
go, oh, well, I'm going to save money if I do it this way. The more years I think that you are in business, the more you become okay with the concept that problems are a given.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah. Yeah.
not if,
Murphy's
it's
Law.
Murphy's Law. So at some
Hmm.
point, problems will happen. I'm going
Yep.
to relate this to shipping at some point in a minute, but
Hmm.
so go ahead and finish out that thought process. So
Yeah.
what is your workaround there? Like, would you split? Like, would you
Yeah.
personally have a max number that you would
It's,
send?
yeah. And I think it's across the board. It's like, it's like you have a bunch of chips. You're sitting at a blackjack table. Like, you just don't go all in. Like, how many are you willing to lose at once? And it's like, if it's a heat treat, if it's shipping, if it's something that could be
Yeah.
catastrophic, it should be probably broken up in a way. If you can afford to lose that whole batch, it is what it is. You're going to get better pricing. It's going to be more
Right.
efficient, but you got to be able to afford to lose it if you're putting in a position where there is that
I would
chance
love
that
to
it could get
know, and,
lost.
and I think too, this relates somewhat to like smaller scale businesses, right? Where
Hmm.
eating, I don't know how many, just thousands of dollars worth of steel we're talking,
Hmm.
okay, would be very painful. So, all right, so here's my shipping analogy with this. So we just sent out
Hmm.
some SQDs for wholesale. We could have put them all in one box. It would have been cheaper to ship. But I realized if that one box gets lost, we lose all of the money.
Hmm.
Two boxes cost me probably an extra $100 in shipping, but one box could go completely missing and I can still pay for that product.
There's some kind of
So
salvage
there's
going
a
on at
salvage. So
least.
I'm hedging
Yeah.
my bets and I'm not taking what I think of as like the quick money, which would be, oh, I'll save half on shipping because I'm not a shipping company and that's not where I make my profit. If I lose half my knives, that's a problem.
Mm.
So what I see that you're saying is almost a prime example would be one, shipping all your knives to heat treat in one batch. That poses its own risk.
Hmm.
So a potential solution could be like if you have 500 knives to heat treat, essentially working with your heat treater to say, I'm sending two separate boxes. I want those separate boxes done in separate runs.
Yes. Yeah. And another thing is like if they're a company that, let's say they're doing Magna
Yeah.
Cut all day long these days because they've got all these different people that are sending them, just say like you can still put like 500, 1,000 knives in
Right.
there. I don't care. Just I don't want more than 250 of
Right.
mine at a
Right.
time or
Yep.
whatever,
It's an
And
odds game,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so for me, like my immediate course of action is like one of the things I did is I got to really thinking I'm gonna be shipping some knives. I'm introducing this into my workflow for the first
Yep.
time because everything else has been in Boise. I'm gonna ship them down to Texas for the bevel
Yep.
grinding on this batch of Confidants. And what I did is I just went to Harbor Freight and I looked at like all their like kind of gun cases or like heavy duty just plastic cases with the
Dude,
gasketing and stuff.
super
And
smart idea.
I found the biggest one that fit inside of a USPS flat rate box, and I'm only going to be able to fit like 25% of this batch per
Yep.
because of how much room the actual
Yep.
box takes up inside there. I could fit all the knives in one USPS box, but I'm putting a $10 POS Harbor
Dude, I
Freight
love that.
box in there, putting the knives in there. I'm going to tape it until it's like a quarter inch thicker in every dimension because of tape. And then I'm going to send it in 4 shipments.
Yep.
And it's not even worth, I mean, you could almost consider like sending them out one day apart
Yep.
so that they're just on different
Yep.
trucks. You know what I mean? And it's like, it sounds kind of extreme,
Sure.
but this bind that I'm seeing happen to honestly one of my friends, like it's devastating. I mean, like you can really
Yep.
lose.
Well, and that's
So
the one of the traps of growth is that you a lot of times are growing into an area that you don't have the capital to lose. So
yeah,
you're
yeah,
making I say gamble, it's not really a gamble. It's a calculated risk, but you are
hmm
taking a calculated risk. It doesn't mean you have the financial backing to eat a catastrophic failure. And
hmm
so some of this stuff, like best practice at a small scale, is like almost about like injury prevention,
hmm
right? You're just like,
yeah,
okay, I actually can't afford to get hurt right now. I mean, you like relate it to like, I feel like, I don't know why I'm going to make a combat scenario relation here, but like you think about it and you're like, that's great. You train and you're super strong and you're well fed. And that's when you have to like be in a fight. That's great. What about when you have food poisoning or like dysentery
hmm
and you're maybe
hmm
a little bit injured? You have to think about it differently. So, like, best practice for small manufacturing and business, a lot of times, is not looking at it from the ideal. This is the everything is in its ideal state.
hmm
You are at a risk. I don't know.
yeah, yeah, and it also brings up like there's insurance in that regard
Yeah.
in terms of like just self-insuring by distributing things. There's also actual insurance, which is one thing I'm insured for all my
Yeah.
equipment and like all my stuff, but I don't think I'd be covered in a shipping
Yeah.
loss necessarily. And so one thing I was thinking is my dad actually he makes really expensive saddles and they go in really big crates and then they
Yep.
ship. And he has that same situation, but he can't break it up
Right.
because it's a
It's one
saddle.
thing.
And so yeah, and so he has a rider on his insurance policy that covers shipping loss, and it's much cheaper to have that if you're shipping a lot of
Yep.
stuff than it is to pay like UPS to
Yeah.
insure it, because UPS, like somebody listening to this might say, "Why don't you just insure all the
Yeah.
value of those?" I'm like, we're talking
Right.
thousands of
And it also
dollars. I
has to be
mean,
provable value. So we're worried about
yeah,
losing the downstream potential of
yeah,
what those. Yeah,
opportunity cost.
it's not just the cost of the materials, which we can prove. It's also
hmm
the cost of the finished product. And it just
Yeah,
if you can have a rider for a pallet of something, you're in a much better scenario. I'm gonna look that up because I don't
yeah,
think we have that. We
yeah,
don't do a lot
yeah.
of big numbers in shipping. So we a lot of times are just insuring a single package.
hmm
Um,
It's good phone call to make though to figure
yeah,
out
good to figure
what
out.
the math
I'm
looks
gonna
like.
throw in another just like a small pro tip, which is we get used to shipping the way that we ship, and sometimes you will have to like say something that's come up for us often is like needing to ship to Germany very quickly. We actually know that FedEx does better a lot of times than USPS, right? And we just recently shipped a package that we needed to get there soon. USPS, like whatever, Priority Express. And as soon as it left, I was like, that was a terrible decision. It took 5 days longer, and we saved a little bit of money. But it's like if you need a package to get somewhere quickly and securely, it's worth paying a significantly larger sum of money
hmm
and going against your like standard practice. That's just my take.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like the Tom Balding
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
It's like it depends on what you're doing
yeah,
specifically, but time is money, and it's like it's easy to say like, well, that's like
yeah,
$60 for 3 days
yeah,
less. I'm like 3 days.
yeah.
You
And
know
it
how
might
much
be
3 days is
150.
worth?
It might be
Yeah,
$200. But at
yeah,
the end of the day, and we didn't make it for a fine. It wasn't like, oh, that's so much more expensive. We just it had been a while since we'd done it, and I feel like we just spaced that FedEx always works better.
yeah,
I
yeah,
was
yeah.
like, it's best practice.
And that's another thing with that flow chart that I like is, yeah, it's one thing to just overnight everything, and like, yeah, there's merit in that. But part of my why I did the flow chart is I was like, how can I make sure I'm preempting a few things
Yeah,
here? Because it's kind of like right now, like if I can't move to the next stage of my flow chart until I build a fixture, that buys me a little more time for shipping to do
yeah,
this or whatever. You know, like if you do have a little bit of a roadmap,
yeah,
you can prevent having to overpay for shipping.
Yeah.
But if you do get to crunch time, pay the money. That's like kind of my philosophy
Yeah,
right now.
absolutely. Money is generally the cheapest way to
Yeah.
solve a problem
Yeah.
before the problem happens.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you look at it and you're like, this is a purely financial decision and you can actually afford it, it's usually the simplest, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. All right.
For sure.
So what else do we got today, man? Is that it? Are we wrapped?
Honestly, I feel like we rounded it out
Okay.
real good there. I mean, I think we had a little technical difficulty. I don't know if you guys caught it, but we actually ended up doing a full hour.
We did. Yeah.
And
Well,
yeah.
we're like slowly working towards being able to do some video. And yeah, we had a glitch with one of us recording video and maybe one of us not, and the recording software having a problem with that.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Sounds about
Okay.
right. I mean, yeah, we'll have to do some digging, but I think the product is we solved it for this episode. But let us know if there's like a weird stagger where something we're saying doesn't make any sense. It's because there's a seam. If you guys can find where that seam is, you should tell us.
Definitely.
And I'm kind of curious.
Or maybe we say the exact same thing in a different way for 5 minutes. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All right.
Little deja vu section in this.
Sweet.
Yeah, man. Good to talk to you.
Good talking.
That was a fun one.
Guys, thank you for listening. As always, leave us a review, share the podcast. Yeah. Let us know if you have questions, comments, and or concerns.
And reach out to that long lost best buddy of yours.
Amen.
Do it.
All right.
Do it right now after you finish this.
See you guys.
Peace.